Welcome to the lecture on welding defects. So far we discussed about various kind of welding processes, and as we know that ultimate aim is to have a defect free weld component. Now as we know that there are chances of errors on many accounts, just like there may be problems related to the machines, there may be problem related to the labor who is working on it. So basically the defects are likely to occur in the case of welding. Now when there will be, so what is the welding defect? Now the quality which we expect, if we do not get that quality, then we tell that there is a defect. Like if we do not get the proper weld surface or proper weld contour, or there are cracks developed, or even the formation of stresses are there, inclusions are there. These are all the kinds of different types of defects which occur in the case of welded components. So basically we also term like like imperfections or even the discontinuities. So this way the welding defects crop up, and basically why welding defect is important to be studied, because ultimately if the defects will be many a times, if the defects are I mean number of defects are more, or the severity of the defect is on a larger scale, then the component is likely to be rejected. So basically the quality will be depending upon how many defects are there, or what is the order of the defect. Whether defect is not there, that is the ideal option. So because the defect, if it is there, it will be trying to impair the strength of the welded joint, and if the strength of the welded joint is affected, then that may lead into the premature failure of the structure. Many a times the catastrophic failure may occur. So that is why the study of the welding defects, what are the reasons of these welding defects, what are the different types of welding defects which occur, and how can we see that we can minimize these defects. Now that study is important for a welder. So principal causes are which occur in the welding, or which results into the formation of welding defects, are the failure to follow requirements of welding specifications. So many a times you have certain procedures which are to be followed, and if you are not following that, that may result into the formation of different type of welding defects, like use of substandard materials. If you are have to use the electrode of certain quality, certain composition, and if you are not using that of basically the proper composition, or with proper quality, or it is not maintained in a good state, like many a times with the stick electrodes or coated electrodes, we need the coating to be in a dry state. So if it is not kept in a proper place, in a proper shape, in that case that may lead to the welding defects. Similarly, defective welding equipment. So many a times the equipment itself may be defective. Like if you are having a welding torch, the torch may be worn out, or the the torch diameter is not appropriate, or the valve which is opened so that there is adequate or required amount of gases have to flow, and it is ignited further, that is not working properly. So this way that may result into defective defects, just like in arc welding, if the arc creation is not proper, those cases the holders are not properly they are not properly holding the electrodes, or the current flow is not proper. Those things also lead to defects. Poor welding skills. So workmanship may be poor. The labor who is working on this, he may not be the skilled one. he may not have the adequate skill to do the working. So, even if the machines are quite all right, you have other conditions quite favorable, but if the person who is doing the welding, if he is not having good workmanship, in that case also the defects occur. So, this way the defects are likely to occur in the case of welding process. Now, we are going to discuss about the different types of welding defects. So, when we talk about the welding defects, then the classification may be broadly under these categories. So, like you have cracks. So, cracks develop at different positions, and they are like hot cracks or cold cracks. You have different cracks in the different, at different in the directions of the weld, or in the transverse direction. So, based on that you have longitudinal or transverse crack. Similarly, crack on certain places, like you have toe crack, then you have the crack on the crater. So, that is crater crack. So, this way different types of cracks develop because of basically the stresses value which reach or because of uneven cooling or so. So, that way cracks develop. Similarly, you have the defects in terms of cavities. Now, the cavities may be like you have blowholes. So, blowholes are there because of the gases. So, cavities means you have the space which is unfilled, where the gases occupy the space. So, you have blowhole is there, or porosity is there, where I mean this is all because of the gaseous problems, defects due to gas. So, you have blowholes, then you have porosities, then similarly you have shrinkages. So, they are in the in the form of cavities, and that is why these blowholes or the pinhole porosities or shrinkages, they come under this category of cavities. Next is the solid inclusions. So, many a times the solid inclusions go into the weld pool and they form the welding defects. Now, in that you may have the slag entrapment, you may have the flux entrapment. So, this way you may have the metallic oxides formation which is there entrapped. So, these are basically in the form of solid, which are as inclusions, like sometimes the tungsten is also trapped. So, tungsten oxide is there, so that also trapped. So, these are the kind of defects under the category of solid inclusions. Then you have the incomplete fusion or penetration. So, in the case of incomplete fusion or penetration, you have the lack of fusion going on, like many a times you have the weld bead is there, and with the parent metal you must have proper fusion to take place. So, if there is a lack of fusion, that is basically a defect, because there the structure will become quite weak. So, the failure may occur at that place. You have lack of penetration. So, because of the improper design, or because of many a times improper heat input or so, the improper penetration also is caused. So, that is coming under this incomplete fusion or penetration. Then you have imperfect shape. So, many a times the contour which we try to have, that is not the one which we get. So, in that case, that the shape must be the perfect shape. So, the imperfect shape contours, they are basically a type of defects. You have basically the different types of defects coming under this category, like you have the dimensional deviation, because you had to have the bead of certain width and that is not there. So, then that is one. Next is your undercut. Many a times you get like undercut. So, in the bottom part you have cut portion, so that is undercut, or underfill is there. So, underfill comes under this imperfect shape of the defects. You have also the cases of excessive penetration. So, excessive penetration also comes under this category of imperfect shape type of defect. Then you have weld bead shape. So, that shape may have the convex type of structure or different improper shape of the weld bead, that is also a defect and which comes under this category of imperfect shape. You have also the miscellaneous defects that includes like strike or excessive spatter, then you have creation of rough surfaces. So, these are the defects which are coming under this miscellaneous defects. Then you have also uneven ripples also sometimes generated. So, these are the defects which are coming under these miscellaneous defects. Further, the defects can also be categorized under those defects which are visual or which are at the surface, and the defects may be the ones which are not visual. So, they are hidden, or you can say that they are the subsurface type of weld defects. So, defects which we see at the surface, which is which you can, by looking at the surface itself, you can find whether what type of defect is there, or else there will be some surface defects which are inside, like inclusions or so, which are there inside, you cannot see them. So, that way you have either the visible defects or you have the invisible defects or the hidden defects. In the case of visible defects, as we have seen, we have different defects, like you have surface cracks which are there on the surface, they are the visible defect. Then you have distortion which you see, that is a kind of visible defect. You have incorrect bead profile. If the bead profile is not correct, that is also a kind of visible defect. You have overlaps, that is so as you see that, if you see that they are overlapping the weld bead, so that is a kind of visible defect. Underfill, then you have unfilled craters. So, you have this way whatever you see on the surface you have different marks, uneven surface marks, surface roughness, these are the visible defects. If you go to invisible defects or hidden defects, in that you have come like there may be cracks which is hidden. So, that is subsurface cracks or hidden cracks. Then you may have be that you have lack of fusion which you do not see, that the proper fusion has not taken place at the appropriate place. So, that will be the situation of lack of fusion. So, suppose you have, so in these cases, so if there is no proper fusion, something like, you do not see them, you cannot see this improper fusion. If it is here, then in that case you do not see. So, that is a kind of hidden type of defect. Then you have the improper penetration, lack of penetration is there which you do not see, which is not visible from outside. So, that is also an example of hidden type of defect. You have shrinkages, blowholes, then you have microstructural changes which has occurred inside if there has been coarse structure because of the temperature. So, all these things are coming under the category of invisible hidden type of defects which we do not see. Now, as we have discussed that there are the different sources which are responsible for having the defect, is the improper selection of process, that is, if you have deep penetrating source may be there where you do not require that, or you have narrow V angle is there. So, in those cases there may be the cracks in the root portion. So, this is under the improper selection of process category. Similarly, you have the application of the process, welding process itself incorrectly. So, you have you are not doing the process correctly, like you are not putting the improper current, you are putting the improper current has to be more for more deposition, but you are not putting the adequate current. So, in that case the defects which may come because of this improper welding process. Many a times we have excess metal deposition also. Sometimes we have the inadequate metal deposition and we may have the excess metal deposition also. Then the many a times the defect come because of the interaction of the weld metal with the part which is already present. So, that if there are impurities that may be interacting with the weld metal. So, if the impurities are left on the surface is not properly cleaned. So, this is because of the improper cleaning, or there are impure substances which react with them, and then they form the undesirable, they give the undesirable properties. So, it is because of the interaction of the weld metal with the impurities, or with the base metal, or you may have sometimes the formation of oxides or silicates or so. Then the another source may be because of the undesirable structure. So, metallurgical structure may be undesirable. You could have you wanted to have a fine grain, but you are getting the coarse grain. So, that may be because of the undesirable metallurgical structure. Then maybe that many a times you have the formation of certain phases, and they are going and depositing at the grain boundaries, creating the brittleness in the weld bent. So, that is because of that type of reactions which take place, or because of the metallurgical lack of metallurgical control of the structure. Then you have undesirable shape of the weld bead due to overfill, or because of the poor profile and poor supervision. So, already we have discussed about all these different types of problems which may come in the case of welding. Now, coming to the different types of welding defects, we will discuss one by one about these defects. So, if you talk about a particular type of defect like cracks. So, the cracks basically are mostly dangerous type of defects in the welding, and what happens that you have different types of cracks which are defined, like if you have the this weld pool and which is going like this. So, the cracks may develop. So, you have this is the weld metal zone, and if the cracks are developing like this, so this is known as the longitudinal crack, and if the cracks are developing like this, so this will be your longitudinal crack. Then this is known as transverse crack. Then crack may also develop in this zone. So, that is known as the crater crack. Now, these cracks are developed if the crack is basically present in the weld metal or in the HAZ, then what happens that this is because crack is developing, because at that point it is assumed that the stress value has reached to a very high level, and that is why the cracks are developed. So, most of the time once you have the development of crack, then it is the job is not acceptable if it is on the surface, and if the customer will see the crack, then certainly they will not be accepting it. Now, the main reason for the crack is that the concentration of stress at any certain place is becoming more. So, that is how these cracks are getting developed. Then you have poor fit up and incorrect welding procedure, that also leads to the formation of the cracks. and many a times if you have the edge quality improper, in those cases these cracks also develops. Now, crater cracks, discussing about the crater cracks are basically caused whenever the welding operation is interrupted. So, once you are doing the welding operation and if you are interrupting in between, many a times you have the formation in here, basically the crack comes and that basically further aggravates as the welding cools. So, what we do is many a times we are filling these cracks so that this crack does not propagate in the case of crater cracks. And normally what is seen is that these crater cracks, when you are doing the welding and you are stopping some time, then basically you must have a convex type of deposit. You deposit the metal in a convex form so that the crater cracks are not formed at this place. So, this way you can minimize the chances of formation of crater cracks, and crater cracks are normally formed in the material with high thermal expansion coefficients, like you have the austenitic stainless steel. So, in those cases the chances of formation of these crater cracks are more. Then we have the other type of defects also. So, next type of defect is basically, suppose you take the distortion. So, we have already discussed about the distortion, and in the case of distortion, as we see that if you have the improper fitting, or if you have not residual stresses are going to a larger level, in those cases that may lead to the distortion. For a distortion, basically you need to have the proper post weld heat treatment, so that you can get rid of this distortion. So, post weld you will have to maintain a slow cooling rate, so that the distortion can be minimized. Many a times we get the incorrect weld profile, and that also has a large amount of a remarkable effect on the weld quality. So, because mainly it happens that when you give the first pass and then that pass is not proper, in those cases these weld profiles may be improper. So, the first pass is very much important in the case of when you are doing the welding. So, first many a times what is seen is that when you are giving the first pass, that should be by experienced welder, and then later on that can be done by a semi skilled type of labor, but first pass has to be basically filled with the very experienced type of welder. So, that way you can have the perfect shape of the weld profile. You have other defects like you have undercuts. So, that is also an important defect. So, as we see in the undercut, so these undercuts are basically the grooves which are melted into the parent metal. So, the parent metal which is there, in that basically there will be some melting, and that is normally adjacent to the toe of the weld. So, that way, like if you have this and here if there is something, so here that is known as undercut in the case of this butt type of weld, and normally they are caused because of the excessive current. So, that is your undercut. Similarly, you have overlap which is occurring. So, in the case of overlap, what happens that now in the case this goes in this side. So, that will be some overlap. So, this way this is known as overlap. Now, in this case that is known as overlap, and they are basically the protrusions on the weld metal itself, you will see that there is this weld bead which should have this as the correct shape. It has gone from here and like this. So, that is known as overlap. So, that basically is obvious by looking at the weld bead itself, and normally it is caused because of the again excessive electrical current. You have other defects, like you have cavities. In the cavities, normally what happens that when you are doing the welding, and if you have moisture left, in those cases also there are chances of gaseous pockets which are normally trapped in. So, that may lead to the cavities formation inside. You may have the shrinkage, also shrinkage of the metal which is taking place, and from that also shrinkage cavities may be generated. Solid inclusions, as we have already discussed, that if it is not properly cleaned or so, in that case the solid inclusions may come up. Incomplete fusion or penetration, it's maybe because of the improper joint, or maybe because of the improper selection of the welding parameters like welding current or so. Imperfect shape, already we have discussed certain types where mainly the welding current improper selection, that is one of the parameter in the case of overlaps. Then you have the miscellaneous kind of defects where we have weld spatter is there. Sometimes, many a times while doing the welding, you have the spattering taking place that results into the rough surface of the weld metal. So, you can have basically the reasons to be known. First of all, once you know that what has been the reason, then accordingly the remedies can be taken. Like if your current is improper, then that case the current has to be maintained. Similarly, if you have the proper joint is not there being made, or fixing is not made, in that case you have to have the fixing, proper fixing of the structure. So, all that way you can get rid of these defects, and then once you have the defects checked, because you have to see that these defects do not appear finally. So, you have the different type of tests or non-destructive testing methods to see that how these how can you see that these defects are not visible, like you are there. If they are not there, then with that machine, if you do the NDT testing and if you get the satisfactory results, that tells. So, depending upon the different types of defects, you can have the basically, once you know the cause and the remedies of these defects, then accordingly you can go for selection of the different parameter selection, and then you have you can finally get a good weld which will be good for the customers, for the company or so. So, in this way we are now at the end of the lectures. We have discussed about the different types of also defects and other aspects of welding processes. You can refer the standard books to study, because this you must have studied in the case of earlier courses, where there must be certain information about the different types of welding defects. And basically after getting certain knowledge about other welding processes or so, or parameters, you can have the link, you can make a link between the different defects and the different type of welding parameters. Like mainly what you see is the selection of proper welding parameters, proper preheat or post heat, proper preparation of the joints. So, these are the main things on which you have to work, and then you can see that most of the, like if the stresses generated are less, then the chances of cracks will be less. Proper practice has to be followed. Similarly, if the proper heat is accumulated, proper heat is going as input, then certainly the chances of cavities, like improper penetration or improper profile may not come. So, like that. So, this way we are at the end. I hope that you have basically got some beneficial knowledge about the course. You have developed some interest while studying this course, and you will be able to basically match this knowledge with the knowledge of the books. You can supplement this knowledge with by reading more about these things in the books, and you can practice even wherever you have the numerical problems. You can solve more and more problems, especially that comes in the case of casting and forming, and then you can have more and more understanding, and if need arises, you can even have basically study of the particular type of process even in detail. So, I hope you have enjoyed the course. Thank you very much for your kind attention to this course. I wish you a good luck towards the preparation of the exams which will be going on later on, and thank you very much.